Okay, we're about to get started back. Hope you enjoyed lunch. How's everybody feeling? Are you a little warm, a little cold? Cold? Okay. All right. Well, we'll work on that. Okay, we're about to get started back with our next session. So do what you need to do. Get rid of your trash. We got a couple of trash cans out. And we'll get back started.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone, and welcome back. I hope that your lunch was good. It was quite tasty. Thank you very much for arranging the lunch and everything. All right. So as we get back going, we'll pick up our conversation around attachment. And we just started talking more about this idea of when a child's attachment relationships are disrupted at home, other adults in their lives, including us, even if it's that we get 5 minutes with that kid, even if it's 10 minutes, even if it's one meeting, we can have a relationship with that child that impacts their life. And so we started looking at what does that mean? How does that impact practice? And we started talking about what are just some baseline foundational things that we need to consider. So we talked about managing expectations. We talked about needing to make sure that we're aware of our own attachment stuff. And so then as we go on, we also look at the importance of positive feedback, the importance of being a positive source in that child's life, somebody that's uplifting and encouraging them. It's so important to remember that when we're working with a child, we're working with a family. The child, especially the younger they are, the more they see their own existence within the context of their family. And even as they age, that remains often a large part of how they view themselves and how they define themselves. And so we need to be aware and be working with the entire family surrounding the child, because the entire family is necessary in that system. When possible, smaller caseloads allows for more attention on each individual child. This is where the systems in which we function might impact our ability to do this. If the funding is not there, the funding is not there. If the staff are not there, the staff are not there. Sometimes those things might be related, not always. And so, to the extent possible, working with fewer kids allows you to give the kids the individualized attention that they really, truly need. Address your own stress and secondary traumatic stress. And we'll talk more about that later. But similarly to the importance of addressing your own attachment needs, your own attachment styles, is addressing the stress and secondary traumatic stress that you're dealing with. I am blanking on the name of the person who said this, but it is an absolutely brilliant quote. You cannot give from an empty cup. You simply can't. And so making sure that our cups aren't empty, that we're managing our own stress and secondary trauma so that our cups are not empty. Starting with safety and trust, when we talked about trauma-informed principles, we talked about how foundational, how essential safety is, and how right behind that is that trustworthiness. Again, remembering that the focus is not make sure the child trusts me. The focus is make sure I am acting in a way that is worthy of their trust if they would choose to trust me. And then be consistent and follow through. I can't remember who it was or even exactly the nature of the comment, but I know that earlier today somebody mentioned the importance of, if you say it, we have to follow through. We have to do what we're saying we're going to do. And that has a huge impact on how trustworthy the child views you and the family, how trustworthy the family views you. When possible and appropriate, and again, it's not always going to be possible and it's not always going to be appropriate, more informal activities. If you're a forensic interviewer, you're not going to then take the child out to lunch. Just probably not advised. But as appropriate, to have as much of an informal taste to it as fits with the role. Sensitivity to that child's specific needs and meeting that specific child's needs. A lot of things on here. I want to key in on the last two. Be mindful of tone, gesture, and vocalizations. A lot of times, I have a friend who grew up in a very abusive home. Her dad was an alcoholic. If her dad had made it through the day without drinking, he would come home and be the most amazing dad in the world. If her dad had not made it through the day without drinking, he would come home and somebody was getting hurt. My friend was the oldest of several siblings, and she said that it was her job, and she determined it was her job, that at all costs she would protect her younger siblings. And she tells me how she learned to tell by the way her dad turned the doorknob whether or not he was coming home sober or drunk. And she said that as soon as she heard a drunk doorknob turn, the minute he walked in the door, she would go up to him and make him angry so that he would beat her instead of her siblings. And she said to me, now I'm an adult and I can't stop listening to the doorknob. She's constantly watching for that sign that there's danger, that there's risk, because that was the only way she survived. Not only to know when to protect herself, but she survived by having a role of protecting her younger siblings. And so being able to recognize her dad coming home and protect her siblings gave her a purpose, gave her meaning in the middle of that trauma, and helped her to survive. And many of the kids with whom you'll be interacting have had to learn, I've got to listen to the doorknob. Whether it's to protect themselves, to protect their siblings, whatever it might be. And your tone of voice, the words that you choose, are the doorknob for many of the kids with whom you'll be working, with many of the kids with whom you'll be talking. And beyond that, there are things that you don't know, that you're going to want to be very sensitive to within the informal word choices, again, in the tone and whatnot. I'll give you an example. I mentioned that I grew up in elementary school in an abusive church and Christian school, and I didn't give a ton of detail. So you don't know a ton of detail. And that did not affect me nearly as much as it did many of the other people that went to that school. Did not affect me as directly. But one of the rules at that school and at that church was you always called an adult male sir and you always called an adult female ma'am. And very early on, I had conversations with my kids. Under no circumstances are you ever to call me sir. Nobody knows that. Now that I'm getting older, people call me sir all the time. And it's like, don't. But you don't know that because there's so much of the story you don't know. And when you're talking with a child, there's so much of the story you don't know. Maybe you know they were abused, but you don't know that their abuser always hummed one particular song. And now they just heard that song, and you have no clue why they just flew into a rage. Maybe you don't know that their abuser wore a specific scent, and you're wearing that scent today. You just don't know. And so be mindful not only of our conscious tones, gestures, voice volume, but be aware that there might be also pieces you don't know. And balance bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. This is a concept that was back on that circle/oval of security. The need that a child has from their attachment figure and from you as an adult who, even for a brief few moments or a longer period of time, is playing that role of secure base and safe haven. Bigger, stronger, wiser, kind. Bigger and stronger that you can protect. Bigger and stronger that you can give direction. Bigger and stronger that when needed, you can redirect. When needed, you can reprimand. Kind, because you can just be a friend to a kid. Kind, because you can be gentle. Kind, because you can be loving and caring. And the wisdom to find the balance between those two. They need that from their parent. Otherwise, they have a dictator parent who can't seem to love them. Or they have a parent who's a great friend, but not so much a great parent. The wisdom to balance the two. The alliance that you develop with the child is strengthened by having shared goals. And this is why it's so important. I was working with a client one time who was absolutely, totally disengaged with his treatment plan. Couldn't care less. And, at the previous meeting, I asked him, what goals do you want to work on in therapy? Therapy's stupid. I don't have any goals for therapy. And this is the consistent response. This particular meeting, I have no clue why. But this particular meeting, he said, I want to get involved in Boy Scouts, and I want to start getting awards in Boy Scouts. We made that the number one goal of his treatment plan. He was engaged in his treatment plan from that point forward. Why? Because he had a say and he was engaged in that treatment plan. And often that same principle works with parents. When you're working with parents, what do you need? What do you want to work on? What do you see as important to help that person feel like their voice is heard? That goes back to empowerment, voice, and choice. Strong, positive, trusting relationships. Remembering that the child's style with attachment might impact how you need to interact, whether you are immediately there and wanting to be close, whether you're backing off and taking it more slowly, but you're watching for the child's pace. And just like in that child's relationship with their parent, things have to go wrong in that child's relationship with you. Things have to go wrong so that they can see relationship can be disrupted and restored. Disrupted and restored. Disrupted and restored. And a disruption in a relationship is not the end of the relationship. It's not a cataclysm. It is normal. And it's okay to have a relationship disrupted and restored. So then, let's take it a little more specific to those areas that we talked about. So we talked about 6 areas that really help attachment to grow. Proximity. Simply being there. Simply being close. Just be around. It doesn't have to be a deep, meaningful conversation. Maybe you just sit down next to them. Maybe you just invite them to sit next to you. Hey, while you're waiting for your therapist, do you want to sit over here? Just be close. Even if they're busy doing something else and could care less about you seemingly, just to be around. Some kids have learned that there isn't a safe way to be close to a person physically. Whether it's because something physically abusive or sexually abusive will happen, but they've learned that it just doesn't work to be close to people physically. If they are open to proximity, you're starting to lay the groundwork. Someone can sit next to you and it'll be safe. If they're okay with that. Sameness. Shared interests, shared experiences, shared struggles. Boy, you came in here and swore at me. I struggle with my language sometimes too. Sometimes, and again, you have to be careful, I'll have a kid walk into my office and they'll drop an F-bomb. And I'll drop an F-bomb in my reply. Not in an abusive way, but it's a connection. It's a sameness that's there. I don't typically drop F-bombs. It's not my go-to. But sometimes that's a moment of sameness. Shared hobbies. I actually won an award. I'm very proud of this award. I won the award for the organization that I used to be with. I was a supervising therapist there, and so I won the award. Therapist most likely to be asked if he's really getting paid for talking about Doctor Who and playing Pokemon. It's one of my deepest pride and joy moments in life. And you know what? Kids connected because I could talk to them about Pokemon. For those that were interested, I could talk to them about Doctor Who. Because they walked into my door, and the door of my office has a sign that is the same as the door on the TARDIS, the Doctor's ship. They walk into my office, and they see Pokemon cards. There's sameness. And so we build on that sameness. Belonging and loyalty. That we support them. You have their backs. There's a client that is seeing me, and who was seeing me, and he had a very rough relationship with his mom. Dad had custody. Sometimes rough relationship with dad, but not quite as rough as with mom. And dad's always asking him, how do you feel about that relationship with mom? How do you feel about that relationship with mom? How do you feel? Is mom making you angry? And he blows up at his dad because he won't stop asking about how things are with mom. I think there's a part of dad that wants to get the dirt on mom. I think there's also a part of dad that's just concerned about his son and knows that he's hurting because of his relationship with his mom. So I don't think his dad has all these nefarious motives or anything like that. But we worked out a plan, and he's going to tell his dad, or he was going to then tell his dad, that it bothers him, and sometimes he just doesn't want to talk about it. And so if he says no, please just drop the subject. And we agreed, okay, I got your back. I will also ask your dad to do that same thing. And when you come and see me, here's the condition. If I'm asking you about your mom, rather than getting mad at me for asking you about your mom, tell me today's not the day to talk about your mom. And I will honor that, and we won't talk about your mom. That empowered him, and he felt loyalty. He felt like I had his back. So we find ways to convey that loyalty, that belonging, and significance. Practical ways to show that the child matters. A worldview that says they matter. That you acknowledge, yeah, you know what, that shouldn't have happened to you because you're too valuable for that. You're too important for that. And you find little ways, making sure that if you're in that role where it would be appropriate, you know when their birthday is, and you say happy birthday. If you know that school's starting, yes, hey, how was that first day of school? Not to manipulate them into thinking you care, but because you actually do care. Because they do matter to you. And they matter to you because they matter. Caring, expressing interest, truly being concerned about them, and not just feeling that way, but telling them you feel that way. I was working with a kid who was in foster care, had been in multiple failed placements. I don't know if he was just entering high school, and I don't think he'd lived anywhere more than a year. And it was actually right after that meaningful meeting that I told you about from the Cultural Providers Network, where we talked about whether or not it was okay to love your clients. And I was still processing through that one. And we had just ended up having a conversation where I told him, and it fit for the conversation, that I did really care deeply about him. I didn't feel like I could say I love you. And I don't think he really would have wanted me to say that. Anyways, but just saying that I care deeply about you. And he's like, that's just because you're getting paid. And I'm like, well, it's true that I'm here because I'm getting paid. But regardless of that, I still care about you. A few months later, we were playing a game, and it was a game that had questions. If you've ever played the Ungame, amazing game. If you haven't played the Ungame, get the Ungame. And he got the question, who's somebody that cares about you? And his answer was, you. Because you told me you do. Nobody else was telling him they cared. And you don't know, you might be the only person, even if it's in that brief 5-minute conversation, you might be the only person to actually say, I care. And you don't know how meaningful that can be. And being known. just the little things that show you care. Holding their emotions, seeing them when their emotions fall apart, that you see the broken things as well as the fixed things, and the things that are staying broken and not getting fixed. And that's okay, because you're still there and you still care. This is a screenshot, but once again, we're not going to watch this video. This is how important this is. This is 2 presentations now that this video has shown up in. Both times we're skipping, but this will tell you how much you need to check out this video. Oh, I almost started. All right, so now if we could take 5 or 10 minutes, just whether you break up at your table. Some tables have just like 1 or 2 people. If you've only got like 1 or 2 people, maybe connect with another table too. And in your groups, talk about and then come back and share within the context of your role, right? Because we know that the role is going to impact what you can do. You can do some things as a therapist that you simply cannot do as a police officer, and you simply cannot do as a forensic interviewer. So there's going to be across the board that some things are going to be specific to your role. What are some things that you can do with each of these areas that build attachment? So why don't we do 10 minutes and then come back and talk. Thank you. Woohoo!
Another guy looking for the perfect lover, the kind of love you only see in a novel. I wasn't waiting for some shiny unicorn. I've nothing around and then you don't. But all of a sudden you're the hero of my story. I celebrate the love and only stole me glory. I still remember the way this whole thing started. I was walking down the city, feeling down and broken hearted. But then I guess all roads lead to Rome. A full-front collision on my way home. I cut a corner, but then we hit and crash. The crash has been the first and hasn't been the last, 'cause it's a different kind of love from any other old school dating is the boat. We are explorers, it's a different kind of love. And everyone is looking like we're crazy people just escaping from lonely. Sometimes I feel that you are from another planet. The way you're attracting small disasters like a magnet. And I don't know if you are from outer space, but I can tell you, girl, I'm enjoying the race. Because I knew when we hit and crashed, my crazy love circus was here at last. This is romantic in a very funny way. I know our kind of love is the one made to stay, 'cause it's a different kind of love from any other old school dating is a bore. We are explorers, it's a different kind of love. And everyone is looking like we're crazy people just escaping from alone. The way that you talk, the way that you move, you make fun of me while I make fun of you. But we always fit, precise as a glove. I really enjoy a different kind of love. Oh, oh, a different kind of love. A different kind of love. A different kind of love.
All right, so it sounds like we had some really good discussion. That's great. Just thinking through and talking about different ways that you can, even if it's just a brief conversation, still connect with that child in a brief amount of time. And remembering too that sometimes you are going to do your best to connect with that child and it won't work, and that's okay. And sometimes the story I told about that teen in foster care, when I told him I cared about him, his demeanor was like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. And I didn't think a thing of it. And then a couple months later, not the following week, a couple months later, he says, yeah, you told me you cared. And otherwise, I would have had no clue that simple statement made a difference. And so sometimes recognizing that your efforts to connect might not work. And sometimes recognizing that they did. They just didn't let you see. All right. So we can start here and then just kind of move around. Maybe a couple of ideas on using those different strategies to build connection. The microphone grimace.
So we talked, I think, more in general concepts and things for us to be mindful of. And the one thing we kept coming back to was remembering that while this may be a conversation we've had multiple times with multiple people, it's very likely this is the first time they've had this conversation.
Yes.
And so just as much as possible, focusing everything on that child in that moment and shutting out all of this other stuff.
Yeah. And that shows that they're significant. Absolutely. And it shows that you know them a little bit because you know where they're at.
And I think your capacity to demonstrate care,
yep,
concern, and that allows for that sameness and that genuine proximity.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, these things overlap all over the place. Awesome. Very cool. All right, your guys' turn. Thank you.
Okay, so we didn't really get finished with all of them. Some things that we discussed as far as proximity. We discussed getting in the floor with them and playing. Some examples were getting in the floor and playing Barbies or coloring. The sameness. Putting on the music that they liked. Showing them that, especially if it was something that we might have liked, that we liked it as well, even maybe singing with them. Belonging and loyalty, just sticking up for them whenever they talk about something in our interviews, asking their permission to discuss it with their parents and trying to, make the situation better. And, with that permission, you go in there and you stick up for them and try to give them a different perspective. Significance and caring, we kind of halted on that one, but I'm sure that we can try to come up with something. Being known, just noticing things that they like. Like I had somebody in the past that, they liked flamingos and just, giving them a sticker with a flamingo on it, or, whenever you notice that, like a little girl, she likes boys' clothes because they're more comfortable, getting her, finding clothes that are comfortable to her and making sure that, those things. Because not all girls like dresses and, stuff like that. So, I don't know, can you think of anything for significance and caring right off the top, since we didn't get it finished up?
In a way, to me, they kind of go hand in hand. Significance of care. I didn't hear that. So I would think like one of the examples was like this kid that had a bad grade and he really wanted to play football, and at some point he was having like a lot of trouble, and in school, getting in trouble and everything, truant, anything that you could ever think of. But anyway, he started progressing, started doing better. So he wanted to play football. So, you go and talk to the coach and the principal and even the superintendent. Well, can we do this? Can we give him an X amount of time to get this grade up and he could possibly get on the team? So I think that would be showing care. You are, valuable. Like we can make this happen kind of sort of thing.
Cool. Great examples. A real quick aside on the grade front. For any of you who happen to have any sway with the schools with which you're interacting, to get them to not send report cards home on Fridays, if at all possible, because then the child has the whole weekend to deal with the fallout of a bad grade. And so if the report card comes out on a Monday, and there is some research, I'm blanking now on who did the research, that shows if report card is released on a Friday, there's more physical abuse that follows rather than any other day of the week. So getting that to change.
She hands me the mic. Well, we talked about a little bit of everything here, but I was just thinking I'm a therapist and she's a GAL, so we're totally so different a little bit. But proximity, when working with the younger kids, like the lady said before, I have many doll babies, and I love to play doll babies. And so just getting to their development level. Teenagers, proximity to let them know that I'm there, I follow you, understanding. Sameness is to remain the same even when they're behaving or not. You still stay in that caring capacity and understanding. Belonging and loyalty is very important to me. I want them to know that you belong here. You're okay. This is a place for you. This is your safe place. And that they're significant. Oh, my goodness. I don't have a problem with telling the children that I love them, because I believe that they need to know that you care first, and I do love the way that God tells me to, so I love everybody. I don't have a problem saying that. One thing that Amy said that was really good, she really focused on caring and being known. And even as a GAL, she talked about wanting to send out cards to her children on their birthdays to let them know, I'm here, I'm for you, I'm thinking about you, and things like that. And I thought that was great, to let them know that she's there, I know your birthday, I know your name, and I care. So I thought that was great.
The only thing is GALs, we don't see these children near as often as therapists. That's not our role, and that wouldn't be a good use of our resource. Proximity, the only thing I could add is, as GALs, we do go to their home, whether it's the foster home or their grandma's home or whatever home they're living in. I always get them to show me their bedroom, show me their toys, things of that nature, just so I see children get excited to show you, even if it's just a toddler bed in a room with no personal items. It's their space, and they like showing me their space. And so when they come to my office, then I'll say, I saw your space, you come see my space. And I think that helps a little bit. And it gets me to, I'm not a social worker, but I do make sure the toilet flushes and the water runs, and I sometimes make sure there's children's toothpaste in the bathroom and a child's toothbrush, and there's children's shampoo, to show me that this caregiver is adjusting their home for the need of the child, and not just having the child in their home, as a babysitter, so to speak.
Yeah, because the child has significance.
So we kind of touched on all of them a little bit. One that in particular maybe we can't always effectively use is proximity. Sometimes we help provide, that feeling of physical security, and other times emotionally we kind of put people on edge. So that's like a case-by-case basis when we should and should not use proximity. Sameness, sometimes we are able to kind of like touch on the shared experiences. That's one of the ones for sameness. Recently, I had she was a younger teenager in my office, 14 or 15. And we were talking about the higher expectations that are on the oldest child, particularly if the oldest child is a girl. Because as a whole, girls are expected to mature faster. And what I learned very quickly was we were both the oldest and we are both daughters. So I really connected with her through that. And before the end of it, she was crying and confiding in me. Wow. There hadn't been a crime had been reported. She was not a victim, so I brought her in to explain to her, this is why this report was done. You're not in any trouble, but I did see some unsafe practices. I really would like to take this chance to educate you, but so that I didn't seem like an entity, wagging my finger in her face. Yeah. I connected with her first. Chris touched on loyalty, and I said, I don't know if we really do that one quite as much in our line of work. And he pointed out that in advocating for them, we are showing loyalty to them. And I was like, I didn't even think of that. So those were our main discussion points over here.
That's great. That's great.
With being at a table with juvenile probation officers, we are like everyone in this room, where most of the time our first contact is with somebody that's not having their best day. And because of that, there's a disadvantage already built into that relationship.
Yeah.
But the thing about our job is that we don't see them one time, and we don't just see them during their crisis time. We actually walk through with them during the process. And because of that, all of these things can be entered in to certain children at different times at different places, but the proximity and sameness, we live in the community they live in. We see them at ball games. We have the opportunity to let them, show them significance or being known by saying, hey, I saw you cheering Friday night, and you did a great job. Or I saw your parents and you at Walmart. What were you getting? Is it you just to show that you're paying attention to them, and means something. And like you said, all of them kind of overlap at times, and so it's kind of hard to just pick one and say it, but just being there and being in the moment with them for that, and letting them know that. And from my experience, and everybody's is different, but mine for caring is never having to say I love them. It's just demonstrating it. You demonstrate you care for someone deeply, they feel it. Yeah. Especially the less they have around them, the more they feel it around a person that does. So for everyone that I work with, that's how they live it. And I'm a support role for most of them. So if one of them has just had to get on to a child, which we do at times, I think all of us have had to, that I follow that up with, why they're so upset with you. It's because they care for you that much. And that's an important thing for them to know, and they respond. And how we know they respond, like a lot of people in this room, is when you see them by chance at another place, like Walmart or the mall or something, they stop you and want to introduce you to their whole family. They want to show you pictures. They want to tell you everything they've done. And in that way, I think that's how we see we've made that connection and a victory, because we do live in the community, not with just the child, but with their families. Yep. And it's important for them to view us as something positive, even though it started off negatively.
Very cool.
So I think actually the third member of our table wasn't here whenever we did the exercise, so I apologize if I don't know your opinions. So we went down the list, and Ashley talked about with proximity. Well, first of all, we're guardian ad litem, so we have a law office, and so when children come see us, it's usually in our office, or as they indicated, we do visit children in their homes as well. Ashley indicated that whenever she addresses proximity in her office, that she actually exits her desk and she has a conference table where she can get much closer to the child and kind of be closer on their level in that way. She talked to, you had good ideas. So she also talked about with sameness that she would ask them who their favorite superhero was. She has little boys, and so superheroes are big at her house, and she's had good feedback in that way. I do the same thing. I try to talk to them about whatever they have going on. I know right now I have a child that's an athlete, and she's a really good athlete. So I go out of my way to ask her about how that's going and make sure she knows that I'm following her abilities there. And I would say that kind of goes along with loyalty as well, that, I'm showing an interest in her life and the positives that she has going on. I think that also addresses being known, pointing out that, in the first meeting that you have with a child, what you know about them may not be so good. And so being known is kind of hard in that first meeting because what we know about them is that they've been neglected or abused, and we don't really like to bring that out as much. But I know for myself, whenever I have foster children for a while, I learn other things about them, like what their interests are, and I try to bring those out in subsequent meetings because you have them for so long. With regard to caring, I think empathy is just a big part of what we do. And even if you're someone that hasn't experienced neglect or abuse, you can try so hard to visualize what it would be like to be a small child, to be so vulnerable, to be afraid, and put yourself in their shoes. You can do that even if you've not experienced it, and that changes your body language. It changes the words that you say. It acclimates you to how they feel and what their needs may be in that moment.
Very cool. Excellent.
A lot of what we talked about was already brought up by others because a lot of it's similar, but we talked about a lot of us have pets and multiple pets, and a lot of the children do, telling them about our pets, have them tell us about their pets, and a lot of times there's sameness in that. And we talked about if the child is doing something like putting a puzzle together, sit down and help them like put pieces together, or kind of together, but also just do it separate in another little area to let them do their thing. But
cool.
Participate in whatever they're doing. And I know a lot of times if I talk to kids and they're small and they're down on the floor or sitting down low, I'll get down to their level to talk to them. Yeah. So I'm not talking down to them.
Awesome. Very nice. Yeah, those are all great options.
Okay, yeah, like she said, most people have kind of covered what we had talked about too. But I think when it comes to children, we agreed is knowing where they're coming from and what they're kind of looking for as far as stability, and kind of being stable for them, and supplying them with things maybe they don't have at home. Most of us always have something to eat, some type of snacks or drinks or things like that. Kids, whenever they come to my office, they're always hungry, always want something to eat or drink. Things that they can do to take their mind off of things. Coloring books, crayons. I have all type of Star Wars stuff in my office that most of them don't know what it is, but they like looking at it anyways. I think an important part of the whole process really is kids have this mindset like, I just have to go with the flow, like whatever, because I'm little and big people are telling me that this is what I have to do. I think explaining to them the process and what they're going to be going through as well. I think that giving them a heads up makes them feel like they're actually part of the process, giving them choices where there are, giving them options, asking them how it would make them feel, if we did this versus that, just asking them about their feelings, how it makes them feel versus, well, this is just the process, so this is what we have to do.
Yeah, you matter.
So.
Cool.
Y'all have all given such great answers. I've learned something from every table, essentially. Proximity, I thought about the idea that we try in our lobby area to make sure that people are, you have choices about how physically close you are to somebody. I do that in my therapy setting as well. Like if it's a new client, I want to give them a choice. You can either sit right here or you can sit over there, whatever you're comfortable with. Sameness, we really try in my therapy initially to find some area of agreement. Like I always think about a girl that did not want to be in my therapy room. It was very obvious her mother had made her come, which is common. And I noticed toward the end, and I'm dying by this point, that she's wearing a little Snape pen from Harry Potter. So I started a whole conversation with her about Snape, who was kind of a controversial figure in the Harry Potter world. And it changed everything.
Yeah.
I mean, she and I established a relationship based solely on that to begin with. Jennifer's also a genius at that, as we've established. They talk about handbags or whatever at the front desk, and she really puts them at ease. It makes them feel important.
Yeah.
Loyalty, I always at some point nearly have an opportunity to tell a child that nothing they say or do will change the way I feel about them. I don't care how you did on your report card or whether you kicked your dad or whatever, it's not going to change how I feel. So significance, the worst place to be is to forget something a child told me that was important to them. So I try to make notes about that. Like if they change boyfriends, I don't want to mess up and call the wrong one because they don't forgive you for that stuff right away. Because she's like, I told you that, Caring, we always try to be very aware, and Jennifer's great at this too. If there's somebody in the lobby who's having a bad day, then when I come out, before I get that child, she's going to tell me, that there's conflict or tension. We're just noticing what's happening and trying to make sure that we're prepared for that. That's being known. We just, same thing really. If they're doing better, we want to remark on that. I see you're making progress in this area, or I hear you say you're struggling about this thing. Just telling them that we're paying attention, essentially.
All right. Very cool. Well, those are some great examples. Thank you, everyone. And I think you can see your roles are also varied, but yet these concepts can apply to each and every one. And you can use them to build relationship with the child in a way that helps the child, in a way that fosters that connection. And then as you do that, it can help strengthen and be protection for that child if that main primary relationship has been damaged or is not as secure as it would be ideally. So we've talked about the whole idea of trauma-informed practice. We've talked about how attachment then fits into that as a very important component of the relationship for that child, helping that child feel a sense of safety, the importance of safety and trust, two of those central pieces of trauma-informed practice, and their importance within the context of attachment and how attachment can help empower that person, how it brings about collaboration with that person. We next want to look at how trauma might play out across the lifespan. And this is important because as you work with kids they age. I know, newsflash. And kids eventually become adults. And sometimes kids eventually become adults with kids. And sometimes kids eventually become adults with kids and struggle. And so we want to be aware of this impact on a child really across the lifespan. There's one study I read. I'm going to switch slideshows here. There's one study I read, and it was not a huge slide, and so I do not know if it was reflective of actual statistics that apply universally or if it just happened to be this one study. But in that study, I think it was 90% of the parents that were involved with child protection had been involved with child protection as kids. And so it very well can be that a child who experienced trauma in their childhood is now struggling and shows up as the parent. So we need to be aware of the impact across the lifespan. And I'll go until 2:15, if that's okay on this topic. All right, so we'll go till 2:15 and we'll take a break at 2:15. That gives us an hour 45 of straight conversation, if that's okay. All right, cool. So if we can go, all right, and again, the first couple slides are going to go fast. Hey, I'm still me. And remember the warning about taking care of yourself. All right, see, wow, that's quick. For this part of the conversation, what we want to look at is a basic understanding of different ways that trauma can impact a person over the lifespan. And as we do this, I'm going to give an incredibly brief overview of a few ways, and then I'm going to land on and focus on one specific way. More deeply explore the impact of trauma on executive functioning skills across the lifespan. That's that one specific way I'm going to focus on. And then engage in group discussion regarding recognizing and responding to executive functioning skill deficits. Along the way, we're going to do an incredibly fun activity. It's great, and it's going to involve lots and lots of embarrassment. So, wonderful. I bet. But here's the thing. Lots and lots of embarrassment, but no microphones. So nobody will have to hold a microphone during that activity. And also, if you don't want to do the activity, you don't have to. It's an optional activity. Well, wait till you hear the activity. It's actually a hilarious and fun activity, and it's not a single person embarrassment. It's more group embarrassment. All right. So, what is trauma? We've talked about what trauma is already, and these are all examples that might show up for a child and then might carry over and impact them as an adult. Some of those are types of trauma that could occur at home. Other types of trauma are broader, more community-based or societally based or even historically based. And yet they can still show up and impact a person across the lifespan. Another list of more types of trauma that can show up in a person's life and show up in a child's life. And as they show up during childhood, as we all know, is a very formative part of a person's life. A lot of the foundations are being laid in childhood for the patterns that will really be represented later in life for that person. And so we recognize and we see that these things are happening in childhood, but also realize then as an adult, many of the things we see are hearkening back to what happened in childhood. And the impact can be conveyed in many, many ways. One of the ways that childhood trauma can impact a person throughout the lifespan is when it comes to faith and spirituality. Victor Veith and I wrote this article, and it appeared in the Mitchell-Hamlin Law Review, on the spiritual impact of trauma and of abuse across the lifespan. And it really looks at, as a child experiences abuse in particular, that drastically impacts their view of God. There's research that shows this across faith systems. Most research is related to monotheistic faith systems, but additional research has been done in more polytheistic or more general faith and spirituality faith systems. And we know that it has a profound impact on your sense of who God is, your sense of the divine, your sense of purpose, your sense of meaning and order in the universe. All of these things come into play, and then you get specific questions. Victor relates the story of when he was speaking to a child, and this question was raised, and I had a child raise the same question in therapy. So two people who happen to know each other but are otherwise unrelated, in unrelated work, hear the same question: am I still a virgin? And that is a profound spiritual question. Do I have to forgive them? What even is forgiveness? And then, if you look at how God is set up in especially monotheistic faith systems, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i, you read how God is set up, and then you look at that circle of security, and you realize across these faith systems, God is described as the secure base and the safe haven. As you go out and explore, because you're told, go, and I'll watch over you while you're going. Go, and I will delight in you. And if you need to come in, I'll protect you. I'll comfort you. I'll still delight in you. And God, across monotheistic faith systems and even in other faith systems, the sense of the divine is set up as this universal attachment figure. And now when you throw in disrupted attachment, that has a profound spiritual impact because it has the potential to impact your view of God or the divine. So this is one of the ways that abuse can impact a person through the lifespan. It can have a lifelong impact on faith and spirituality. It can have a profound lifelong impact on psychosocial development. I know that at least a couple of people here have done, even some recently, a master's in social work, where I'm just assuming you spent a lot of time talking about Erickson and psychosocial development. And all I've got to say is, you know your child's last name is Erickson. Don't make their first name Eric. Anyway. But as the child goes through these different phases of development, and they're working through these different tasks, when a significant disruption or challenge occurs, they can get stuck in that developmental level They can get stuck with that problem being unresolved, and then it carries with them throughout the lifespan. So let's take, for example, this preschool child from the ages of 3 to 5. As they're really working through initiative versus guilt. Can I act on my own, or am I unworthy? Am I just going to screw everything up all the time? And you interject into that developmental period a person that says, yeah, actually, anytime you do exercise initiative, you are going to screw it up. So stop exercising initiative because you're a big failure anyway. And now the person is stuck, not able to resolve this. And it goes for all of these developmental levels as they build on each other. And you need the foundation before it to be resolved before you can move on and really effectively resolve the next level. And so often, somebody might be going to therapy and they're having to address stuff that an infant was so that they can just learn to trust versus mistrust. And then you have to build on that to keep moving through these psychosocial developmental stages that weren't effectively worked through. And sometimes you'll get a child where you get stages mashed together. A child who had to face their mortality in a way that no child should have to face their mortality. And now, suddenly you've got a child having to deal with the issues that a 65-year-old person who's looking at, or older, who's looking at, okay, maybe I'm now in this meaning-making of my legacy for the end of my life as I move in that direction. But they're 12 because they almost were killed by a parent when they were 10. And then you get these stages mashed together. So this is another way that trauma can impact a person throughout a lifetime. And you've probably worked with parents, and as I think you can see it better on your handout, but as you look at those developmental tasks, think about some of the parents you've worked with, and you can say, you know what, that parent was stuck here. That parent probably didn't work through this developmental task. That actually makes some sense. And then we've got the broader social ecology around a person and the way that trauma can impact that, the way that abuse can impact your family relationships, your connection to community. I mean, connection to community can so often involve your faith community. Many of the people at the school and church I went to as a kid will have nothing to do with church. They might have actually an incredibly deep relationship with God, but will have nothing to do with the church. And now, because of that trauma, their social ecology has been changed as an effect of the trauma. Going back to our definition of trauma, the event, the experience, and the effects. As an effect of the trauma, their social ecology has changed. And policies now that are out there for everybody might impact them differently than it impacts other people. Social expectations impact them differently, and they may not be as connected to certain components of community. And we've all heard about the adverse childhood experiences study that helps us understand how experiencing these adverse childhood events impacts us throughout life in both health and mental health in so many ways. So these are ideas about how trauma can impact a person through the lifespan. But the one I want to focus in on today is something called executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills are really broad. Has anyone heard of the term executive functioning skills? All right, so we've had some people that have heard of these executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills are basically the skills that allow us to do life. They rest in the front part of the brain, and they are learned skills. They are not innately there. They're learned. And they're learned by trying them out. They're learned by hearing people talk about them. And they're learned by watching the models in your life exercise executive functioning skills. Can we do the next slide? Thank you. It's our command and control. The executive functioning skills, and I'll talk about what they are related. They're overlapping. There's also significant situational variability. As we talk about these skills, you'll probably be able to think of a kid and you'll be thinking, oh my gosh, that kid really showed great executive functioning skills here, but ridiculously bad executive functioning skills here. What's going on? Well, there's significant situational variability. And for some kids, interjecting stress into the situation helps them hone in and focus on these executive functioning skills. And now their executive functioning skills, which are normally on the floor, are suddenly through the roof, and they're excelling in a situation of high stress. And for other kids, they enter that situation of high stress, and normally they're at an okay level of executive functioning skills, and then they tank as soon as they hit stress. So it plays out differently based on the situation and based on the child. They're learned. Development is not linear. These skills do not gradually improve at a steady pace. These skills are all over the place, up and down and up and down, and you're sometimes going to be left like, what the heck is going on with this kid? Many areas of the brain that allow development of executive functioning are driven by experience. So it's not just you learn by experience, but as the brain as a whole develops through experience, the capacity of the brain to do these skills grows. And we have to remember two components with these executive functioning skills: competence and confidence. Because we're not just looking at, can the child do this? Can the adult do this? We are asking, do they believe they can? Because it does no good if I can make a three-point shot, which I can't, but it does no good if I could, if I don't believe I can, so I never try. And so as we talk about these executive functioning skills for kids and for adults, it relates both to competence, the ability to do these things, and confidence, the belief that you can do these things. And the best way to understand these executive functioning skills is through an activity. All right. So it's a basic activity. The only thing that is required in order to do this activity, so I just want to check, can you count to 3? So some may be iffy, but I think for the most part, we can get to 3. If we can get to 3, we're good. All right, so I'm going to ask you to stand up. And again, participation is voluntary, so if you really, truly do not want to do this activity, you do not have to. And I will also say that if I if you decide to give it a go at the start of the activity and then we progress in the activity and you decide, I think I changed my mind, it's totally fine to change your mind. All right. Have I created enough angst and anxiety for everybody? All right, great. It's actually not that incredibly hard. So here's the activity. You're going to break into groups of 2. All right, so break into groups of 2. And then after you break into a group of 2, we're simply going to count to 3. But we're going to take turns. And so what that'll be, it'll be like 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Just like that. Does that make sense? I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to do this activity with a group. This is the first time I have done this activity in a group since COVID started, and I love this activity. So thank you for being the first group to do this with me since COVID started. All right. If that makes sense to everybody, it does not make sense? What's that? Yep, I'll repeat it again. So we're just going to count to 3 in our dyads, in our groups of 2, and we're going to take turns. So it'll be 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Does that work? All right. Go ahead. All right. So, all right, so did that work for everyone? That worked? All right, so I got a question for you. Oh, we're not done. Oh, we are not done. All right, so was that easier or harder or about the same as regular counting? Harder. All right. But still doable? Okay. Now it's time for phase 2. Now with phase 2, we're going to keep that same thing, count to 3 in your dyads, taking turns. However, we're going to ditch the number 2 and replace the number 2 with your favorite animal sound. That's right. So we are now talking, yes, 1 woof 3, 1 meow 3. Exactly like that. Now, does that make sense to everyone? That makes sense? We good? All right. You may begin. All right. Round 2 is over. There's still one more round. All right, so round 2 is over. Was this easier, harder, or about the same as the last round? Harder. All right. But was it still doable? Yes. All right. Is there anything that I could have changed about the instructions to make it better, or were the instructions were okay? All right. So now We're heading to phase 3. And don't worry, phase 3 is the last phase. So, we're keeping counting. We're keeping the back and forth in your dyad. We're keeping the number 1. We are keeping your favorite animal sound. We are getting rid of the number 3. And the number 3 is now replaced with your favorite dance move. Now, for those of you who are Baptist, I'm sorry, I understand if you need to withdraw from the activity because you cannot sin at a training. All right, do those instructions make sense? Yes, they make sense? Y'all ready? All right. You may count. All right. All right. Y'all survived. That was truly the last phase. Thank you. So, was that easier, harder, or about the same as the previous time? Harder. All righty. All right. So, you can sit down. You can sit down. You can breathe easy. We're good to go. So that activity actually had nothing to do with the presentation. I just like seeing people do it. So, I'm kidding. No, actually, we are now going to talk about 8 different executive functioning skills. And every single one of you just used at least 7 of them in that activity, and some of you just used all 8. So this is how we are going to understand the executive functioning skills. Inhibition. The ability to stop something. The ability to stop that thought before it comes out your mouth. When you thought, Pete, what kind of an idiot are you? But you didn't say that. You used inhibition. When you wanted to punch me for doing this activity, but you didn't. You used inhibition. And now think about a child, think about a parent who is now struggling with inhibition, and when that thought comes to their mind that their kid is an idiot, doesn't have inhibition, and it comes out their mouth. When that thought comes to their mind how much they wish they could just smack their child, and they struggle with inhibition, and they can't stop it. Inhibition is probably one of the key things that separates most people that are not involved with child protection and most people that are. Because most people I know have at one point or another wanted to smack their kid and stop themselves. Most people I know have wanted to say something to their kid and have stopped themselves because they had inhibition. It is what allowed you not just to do that, but to stop yourself from saying the number 2. To stop yourself from saying the number 3. You were using inhibition throughout this activity. Shift. The ability to move from one thing to another thing. For kids, this might show up as the ability to move from one class to another class. You give a parent a book to read on parenting. It's what allows them to shift from chapter 2, talking about positive reinforcement, to chapter 3, talking about consistent bedtime. Because they had to shift topics. It's what allowed you to accept a different way of counting. It's what allowed you to move from a sedentary sitting activity to an active standing activity. Shift is what allows us to change our minds. To recognize that maybe I thought this way before, but now I think this way instead, and that's okay. To accept that the person with a different opinion than you have isn't evil, but just has a different opinion than you have. It's what allows us, once we tell a story, if we realize, oh, I impulsively, without inhibition, said something that was not accurate, now I can change that story by using shift. But now if you have a deficit in both inhibition, you just told what everyone's going to take as a lie, but in reality was a lack of inhibition when you wanted to say a different story than reality, and then stops you from correcting it to the truth because you can't deal with shift. So this is shift. You saw how you used it today, and you can, as I'm describing it, probably think of how that plays out in kids and in adults that you're talking to. Emotion and focus control. Now, I heard a couple of people laugh. I did not see anyone, although it was close, I did not see anyone collapse on the floor in an uncontrolled pile of hilarity. Why not? Because an emotion came, but you stayed in control. The emotion didn't have the control. And it is an executive functioning skill to allow that emotion to come, but allows you to stay in control. And people without or with a deficit in this area, when an emotion comes, the emotion explodes and the emotion controls. And now that little bit of anxiety, am I going to be embarrassed? Which is legitimate, especially when I just set it up as embarrassing. Well, then of course the question is it going to be? But you still did the activity, right? And everyone was probably a little bit nervous. How embarrassing is this going to be? But yet you still did the activity. Why? Because there was a little bit of anxiety that came, a little bit of worry, but you stayed in control. The anxiety didn't take control. Not only that, I can just imagine it was probably a little bit distracting as you were counting, having every single person in the room counting at a different speed, at doing different noises and moves and everything, but yet you had to stay focused on the activity. And you did, and that's focus control. And so now you've got a parent who, when anger comes, anger controls. Now you may have a parent, and there's going to be a lot more going on than just this, but you have a parent or other person, when arousal comes, arousal controls. Now you have a parent, when a desire to flee comes, the desire to flee controls, and the only option they've got for fleeing is either leaving their child unattended or fleeing chemically. And so we need this ability to have an emotion come and stay in control. But some people have recognized when emotions come, I lose control. And I don't like that. And so the way that I'm going to make sure that that doesn't happen is that emotions will not come. And now, not because the person is void of emotions, but because emotions are so powerful in their life and they don't believe they can control the emotion, they've shut off emotion. And now you have a cold parent. Now you have a disengaged parent that seems not to care about their kid and seems not to be emotionally engaged with their child at all. When the reality is that they've learned, possibly in very difficult ways, that if emotions come right now, they don't have the capacity to manage those emotions. Initiation. The ability to start something. If you give a parent a task, if they're going to start it, they have to use initiation. If a kid is supposed to call his probation officer, they got to use initiation to pick up the phone and dial. You had to use initiation when you started counting. You had to use initiation when you were the first one to make that sound, when you were the first one to do that dance move. Every time you used initiation. And if a parent is struggling with it, it takes an awful lot of initiation to leave an abusive relationship. An awful lot. And if you have a hard time with initiation and you have a hard time with shift, how are you going to start that big of a change? And then you throw in a deficit in emotion and focus control, and you're so anxious and worried about what that change might bring and whether or not that person is going to come and find you. And now you've got all these deficits in executive functioning skills that relate back to an adult impact of childhood trauma. And you've got a person who is stuck in an abusive relationship and whose kids now are starting to bear the brunt of it. Working memory. Working memory is not just the ability to remember, but is the ability to remember what you need to, when you need to, and to put it together with other pieces of information. When you remembered the instructions, you were using working memory. When you remembered what an animal sounded like, when you remembered how to floss, I think you were I can't floss. I think that was you flossing. I can't remember. But, oh no, not your teeth. How do you know I flossed this morning? I don't know. Anyway, when you remembered how to do that, and when you remember how to do it at home too, but that's working memory, because you're remembering what you need to, when you need to, and then putting it together. I worked with a middle school kid. He was on the A honor roll at school. But his working memory, I don't know how he managed to stay on the A honor roll at school, because his working memory was really challenged. So he comes into my office for therapy one day, and we're getting ready to play a game. And when we play a game in my office for therapy, we determine who goes first by who got the most sleep the night before. And so I said to him, "How much sleep did you get last night?" And he said, "I don't know." I'm like, "Come on, how much sleep did you get last night?" "I don't know." What time did you go to bed? This time. What time did you wake up? This time. How much sleep did you get last night? I don't know. And at this point, I'm thinking, what's going on here? You don't usually play these games with me. Why are you doing this today? And I said, what happens when you compare the time you went to bed with the time you woke up? And he said, oh, I got this much sleep. He couldn't figure out how to put the pieces together to get the answer because he had a deficit in working memory. You remember what you need to, when you need to, and you can put those pieces together. And when you ask a parent to remember to do something, when you ask a parent to put the pieces together, if they struggle with working memory, they may struggle to put the pieces together and may need you either to ask them what happens when you put these together. May need you to say, put them together. May need a treatment plan that helps them figure out how to put things together. This is working memory. Planning and organization of ideas. This includes rank ordering. When you picked your favorite animal sound, you did a rank order. When you picked your favorite dance move, you did a rank order. It also includes other things like prioritizing. What's the most important here? Is it more important that I want to say the number 2, or is it more important that he said to say an animal noise? Which one's more important? So it allows for prioritization. It allows for rank ordering. It allows you to hold multiple ideas at once, more than one idea at the same time, to be thinking about the animal sound and the dance move at the same time. To be thinking about the number 3 and the dance move at the same time. These are all related to organization of ideas, and a parent might come to you as an adult with a traumatic childhood and struggle with planning and organizing their ideas. And now they might not be able to plan ahead. Now they might not be able to figure out, okay, if I have to call them at 3, I have to do this by 2:30, this by 2, be done with this at 1, and in order to get done with that at 1, I need to start it by 10. And that requires organization of ideas and planning. And this might be a struggle because either they didn't learn it in childhood, they didn't observe it in childhood, or their brain development was impacted in such a way that their brain has less capacity for it. Next one. Organization of materials. This is the wild card. How many of you, when you stood up, pushed your chair in? Okay, not too many people. Few. Did anyone, when you stood up, organize your stuff on the table? Like straighten out your papers, move a pen, move a cup, anything like that? All right. Not so much. If, during this activity, you did, apparently one person did. If you did any activity designed around imposing order on your physical environment, you just used organization of materials. If you saw my car at home, you would know that this is not a strength of mine. But it's our efforts to impose order on our physical environment. And if a parent is struggling with this, you may have noticed at times a parent with a messy house. You may have noticed a parent whose physical environment tends to be in chaos. You may have noticed a parent who tends to lose documents, who tends to lose phone numbers. This is a parent potentially who is struggling with organization of materials going back even to childhood trauma. Self-monitoring. This is perhaps one of the most important things, and yet we often forget about it. Every time I asked you, do you understand the instructions? You had to use self-monitoring in order to answer me. When I asked, could I have phrased the instructions any differently? Would that have helped? You had to do self-monitoring. When I said, which was harder? You had to do self-monitoring. And when you are asking a parent, does this seem like a doable goal? You've just asked them to use self-monitoring. When you ask a parent, is this week any better than last? You just asked them to do self-monitoring. When you ask a parent, how are you doing at managing your anger? You're asking them to do self-monitoring. At managing your anxiety, at managing your depression, you're asking them to do self-monitoring. And self-monitoring shows up in other ways as well, because self-monitoring shows up in your ability to recognize your role in whatever situation you're in. Have you ever encountered a parent who didn't see how it was their fault? Who didn't see that they, and I'm not saying fully their fault, but who didn't see that they had a role to play in the fact that child protection's involved? This very well could be a parent who's struggling with self-monitoring, because self-monitoring allows you to see your role in whatever situation you're in. I have a friend who told me the story about a client of his. It was I can't remember if it was late elementary or middle school now client. And that client was sitting in a classroom, and another student was walking by the classroom, and as the other student walked by, the student client stuck his foot out and tripped that student. That student got up, reached over and swept all of the books off of the client student's desk. And the client student responded by raising their hand and saying to the teacher, "Did you see what he just did?" And the teacher said, "Yeah, I saw what he did. You tripped him. What did you expect?" And the kid couldn't see how those two things related, because in order to see how his actions impacted his situation, how his actions impacted another person, requires self-monitoring. And he was struggling with self-monitoring. Now, a fascinating thing is we've talked about how all of these executive functioning deficits can very strongly be an ongoing impact of childhood trauma across the lifespan. All of these are also characteristics of ADHD. All of these are also characteristics of PTSD. As we talk about these executive functioning deficits, think about almost any mental health diagnosis, and you're going to see overlap. And so we recognize that, yes, trauma is very much a way to end up with executive functioning deficits. But so are some other mental health diagnoses. And also, sometimes a person will get a mental health diagnosis not because they have that, but because they have executive functioning deficits from trauma. And now it looks like ADHD. now it looks like anxiety or depression. And it plays out that way, but the root is the trauma that has affected their executive functioning skills potentially throughout their life. And the other piece of it is this. This is a brain image comparing typical brain images of a child who has not experienced abuse and a child who has experienced abuse. And a key piece to note on this scan is the significantly decreased activity here and here. Less color is less activity. These spots where there is less activity are the spots in the brain where the executive functioning skills rest. So in part, we're talking about didn't have a chance to learn the skill, and in part, we're talking about the brain is impacted, and there's less capacity now for the skill. Super important to remember, we've got neuroplasticity, we've got the brain's ability to start regenerating and to build back some of this, right? Because so it's not, all right, I guess they experienced childhood trauma, now they're stuck with this. They'll never get it. That's not the case. It takes work, but we can strengthen the activity in this area of the brain again as we challenge a person, whether it's a child or an adult, to use these skills, to meet them where they're at. And sometimes at the beginning, we're pretty much going to be doing those skills for them, and then gradually wean them off our help as we work with them so that they can use those skills more and more on their own. And by using those skills, it activates these parts of the brain. And as these parts of the brain get more activity, we get to start lighting this up again. So what can we do? What time did I say I would take a break? I think I'm late. I'm late. We'll talk about what we can do after, is a 10-minute break okay? After a 10-minute break.